Have you ever agreed to something you didn't want to do, and then spent the rest of the day feeling frustrated? Maybe you answered a work message late at night even though you were exhausted. Maybe you cancelled your own plans because someone else needed a favor. Maybe you said it's okay when it clearly wasn't. Or maybe you smiled while secretly hoping someone would finally notice how overwhelmed you felt. Most people think setting boundaries is about learning to say no. But psychologists Henry Cloud and John Townsend argue that boundaries are about something much deeper. They're about understanding where you end and where someone else begins. Many of us grow up believing that being a good person means always being available, always helping, always forgiving, always putting everyone else's needs before our own. At first, that sounds compassionate. But over time it creates something dangerous. A life where everyone else decides how much of you they get. Without realizing it, you slowly become responsible for everyone's happiness except your own. One of the most powerful ideas in the book Boundaries is that guilt isn't always a sign you're doing something wrong. Sometimes guilt is simply the feeling of breaking an old pattern. If you've spent years saying yes to avoid disappointing people, saying no will feel uncomfortable. Not because it's wrong, but because your brain has learned that keeping everyone happy is the safest option. That discomfort often gets mistaken for selfishness. But it isn't selfish to protect your time, your energy, or your emotional well-being. It's necessary. People who struggle with boundaries usually aren't afraid of saying no. They're afraid of what comes after. Conflict, disappointment, rejection, being misunderstood. For many people, boundaries don't feel like communication. They feel like risking love itself. That's why people-pleasing can become so addictive. Every yes brings temporary relief. Every no feels like danger. Until one day you realize you've built a life that everyone else enjoys. Except you. Another powerful lesson from the book is that resentment is often a boundary problem. Think about the moments you've quietly thought, "Why do people always expect so much from me?" Often, they aren't intentionally taking advantage of you. They simply don't know where your limits are, because you've never shown them. Every time we say yes while secretly wishing we had said no, resentment grows. Eventually we blame other people for crossing lines they never knew existed. Healthy boundaries don't create distance. They prevent resentment from replacing love. Another common misunderstanding is believing that boundaries push people away. The opposite is usually true. Imagine buying a house without doors. Anyone could walk in whenever they wanted. No one would call that generous. They would call it unsafe. Your emotional life works the same way. Boundaries aren't walls built to keep people out. They're doors. You choose when to open them. You choose when to close them. And because you have that choice, your yes becomes genuine instead of automatic. Perhaps the hardest part of setting boundaries is accepting that some people won't like them. Not because you've become less caring, but because they benefited from the absence of boundaries. When you stop fixing everyone's problems, some people become uncomfortable. When you stop apologizing for having needs, some people become defensive. That doesn't automatically mean you're losing healthy relationships. Sometimes it means unhealthy patterns are losing control. Cloud and Townsend also remind us that every healthy relationship includes responsibility, not ownership. You are responsible for your actions, your decisions, your words, your reactions. But you are not responsible for another person's emotions, expectations, or happiness. That responsibility belongs to them. Understanding that difference can feel incredibly freeing. Because it allows compassion without carrying burdens that were never yours to begin with. Perhaps the biggest surprise is that boundaries aren't only something we give other people. They're something we give ourselves. Permission to rest. Permission to disappoint people occasionally. Permission to change our minds. Permission to protect our peace. In the end, boundaries aren't about pushing people away. They're about creating relationships where both people are free to choose each other instead of feeling obligated to stay. The healthiest relationships aren't built by constantly sacrificing yourself. They're built through honesty, respect, responsibility, and the courage to say both yes and no with the same kindness. Because the strongest boundary you'll ever create isn't between yourself and other people. It's between who you truly are and who you've spent your whole life believing you had to become.